In the wake of the announcement that the Nintendo Switch is going to be a handheld console hybrid, many people, understandably so, have been concerned about the hardware strength of this system and the architecture and how that's going to possibly affect third-party support and how games can look and, behave on the system. What I'm going to try and do in this video is reassure people that modern, familiar architecture and good software tools are far more important than hardware strength, and that this system is probably not going to be as weak as you think. So let's start with the architecture. The day the Switch was announced, Nvidia actually came out and revealed, or I guess confirmed, that they are actually the ones powering the Nintendo Switch. Their Tegra chip, which we haven't got a confirmation on which Tegra chip it is, or even if it's custom or not, is the thing that's powering the system. They elaborated by saying that the Tegra system on a chip that is on the Nintendo Switch matches the architecture of the world's top-performing GPUs. That is a good hint that the Nintendo Switch is using Pascal architecture. If it's not using Pascal architecture, that just doesn't make any sense. Nvidia has been developing the Pascal architecture for years, and the Nintendo Switch has been being developed for years. And Nvidia wouldn't just hide something like this from Nintendo. And guess what? The world's top-performing GPUs do not perform on anything other than Pascal architecture. Now, using a modern architecture provides two major advantages. The first advantage is that it can provide the best possible performance per watt, aka efficiency, for the given chip. The second advantage is that it can provide a stable ground and a familiar ground for software developers to use so that they can get the most advantage out of the chip possible. Nvidia's CEO actually just recently came out and said this: "The quality of games has grown significantly, and one of the factors of production value of games that has been possible is because the PC and the two game consoles, Xbox and PlayStation, and, in the near future, the Nintendo Switch, all of these architectures are common in the sense that they all use modern GPUs, they all use programmable shading, and they all have basically similar features." Now, don't get me wrong, the chips inside the PC, the PS4, the Switch, the Xbox, they all have differences. They do vary in design and capabilities, but they still use a common architectural language. That's despite Tegra using mobile ARM architecture and the other consoles in the PC using based x86 design. Now, this was in the middle of elaborating why it'll be easy for developers to port games over from PS4, Xbox One over to Switch, or develop on all the systems at the same time. Nvidia develops their chips at the low level first and then scales it up for the PC cards. So the GTX 1070 sitting inside of my PC may be orders of magnitude stronger than what's going to be inside the Nintendo Switch, but it's still using the same basic design, and Nvidia is still going to provide all the same basic software tools for developers to be able to take advantage of features inside this chip and the new Nintendo Switch Tegra that it's using. And let's go into another point. Nvidia are not stupid. They don't take a hands-off approach on their game consoles like AMD does with the PS4 and Xbox One. They're going to be working alongside Nintendo and providing developers with guidance and APIs and software tools to take the most advantage out of their hardware they possibly can. Talk to any PC gamer who has owned both AMD and Nvidia graphics cards, including me, and why they are with the company they are with. A lot of people like AMD because they actually do provide an excellent graphics card for the price. I still believe that the RX 480, 470, 460 are the best possible low-end cards you can get. They're strong and they have a good price. But where Nvidia comes out on top is software. This is something you can't deny. Look at Nvidia GeForce Experience. They were the ones doing this first, and they have added all sorts of awesome features. Look at Ansel. You can take unlimited resolution screenshots of your games and edit them like photographs with any camera angle you want, no matter, as long as the game has a simple patch. Look at Shadowplay, which is arguably the best screen recorder available on PC. That's what I've been using for my games pretty much since my channel started. All Nvidia Shadowplay, except for a few times when I tried different things. I can seamlessly record in ultrawide, I can record in 4K with very, very little overhead because of the fact that they were able to develop this software to work with their cards perfectly. So Nvidia is not dumb. If Nintendo aren't going to be working with third-party developers on how to take the most advantage out of their hardware, which is what happened with the Wii U, then Nvidia sure as shit is. They definitely are going to be doing that, because they don't have a comfortable foothold in the console market like AMD does. This is going to be their only foothold right now this generation, and they need to make their money on that. They don't want the Switch to fail, just like Nintendo doesn't want the Switch to fail. So Nvidia is going to be providing this extra software support and help alongside Nintendo most likely, because they did say they learned their lesson from the Wii U, and I'm going to link this video again. They didn't help third-party developers with the Wii U because they knew the thing was going to fail from the get-go. At least that's what I think. Oh, and also one more thing I want to add. A lot of people have been worried about the Nintendo Switch's power because they were looking at the performance of the Nvidia Shield tablets and the Shield console on the TV, looking at it, thinking, look at that, that's running last-gen games barely better than an Xbox 360, and getting super worried. Well, first of all, no, the thing is not running last-gen games slightly better than an Xbox 360. It's running games significantly better than an Xbox 360, and is even running some modern games that work better on AMD hardware such as Doom, without any sort of problems. But here's one thing that people seem to forget. The Shield tablet and the Shield console both still run on Android. Now, Android is not well optimized for any specific hardware, and it does not provide software developers low-level access to the hardware inside the system. Meanwhile, like iPhone, for example, does. The regular game consoles do. This is why games and 3D rendering run so much better on the iPhone versus an equivalent Android phone, because of that low-level access. The Switch is not going to run on Android. Nintendo already confirmed this months ago. Nvidia and Nintendo are working together to build the software and OS for the system to make sure that everybody has the most access to the hardware they can possibly get. So, the performance you see on the Shield console, with its highest-end Tegra X1, yeah, that's not even close to what the Nintendo Switch is going to be able to do because of the kind of software support that this thing's going to get from Nvidia. Now, what about that other point I made early on in this video about how a modern architecture can provide a much higher performance per watt efficiency than an old unoptimized architecture can provide? Well, to answer that question, I'm just going to show you this quick clip from the 8-bit guy when he was reviewing the Power Mac G5. Just take a quick look.
So, this machine represents the fastest of all of the PowerPC machines that Apple ever produced, as well as the very last one they produced.
One of the first things I noticed when I fired it up was how noisy it was. Even being under the desk, it was annoyingly loud. However, I am capturing the audio directly to another computer, because if I weren't, you'd be hearing this. So I could literally feel the heat on my legs from this thing under the desk. It really feels like I have a space heater under there. In fact, I measured the temperature of the air coming out of the back and it was 105 degrees.
So 105 degrees really isn't all that hot for any computer, even an efficient computer. But when you see the amount of airflow coming out of this thing, then 105 degrees suddenly becomes quite a bit of heat.
I tried a kilowatt meter and I got a very different result. I saw as much as 355 watts here, which is more like what I expected and is similar to a small space heater, which makes sense why my feet kept getting so toasty.
Well, let me show you something. So this is a Mac Mini. It came out about a year after this machine was discontinued. Now, this machine is actually faster than this machine. And I actually checked the energy usage on this machine with the kilowatt meter, and I got 16 watts when sitting at idle and about 33 watts at its max performance. So that means this machine uses over 10 times the amount of power and is still not as fast as this one. I mean, and this machine is light and it's quiet, and this is just such a much better machine, and it really leaves no doubt in my mind that Apple made the right decision when they left the PowerPC architecture behind and switched to Intel.
Before I continue, if you're not subscribed to 8-Bit Guy, you definitely should be. He reviews retro tech and kind of relates it with modern day technology, and it's super interesting to watch his stuff. But you saw that. The Power Mac G5 was so hot that it had to have water cooling inside of it. It pulled about 350 watts from the wall, and wasn't all that fast, and it was loud and hot. Was not a very optimized system, and that was running a really old IBM PowerPC architecture that Apple was very stuck to from the 90s and early 2000s, and back in the day it provided good advantages. But it was hard to develop software for it, because Windows, which was the dominant OS on the market, and it still is, did not run on the same platform as PowerPC. So people were reluctant to port, and as it was getting to its end, it wasn't very hardware efficient because it wasn't a modern architecture. This is why Apple switched over to Intel eventually, and look what happened. The Core Duo Mac Mini pulled 1/10 the power from the wall, it did not require anywhere near as much cooling, and it was a faster system. So just by moving to a modern architecture, Apple was able to vastly increase the speed and performance of their computers, while also drastically reducing the power draw from the wall in the TDP. Now you may be saying, oh, the Wii U has a 2008 graphics card, it's not going to be that much of a jump going to the modern Pascal architecture. Well, I would just like to remind you that the Wii U, the CPU in it, is pretty much just using a massively overclocked version of what the Wii and GameCube had, and the GameCube's CPU was developed in the late 90s. So this is in dire need of a modern architecture. The Wii U, even though it had a 2008-S graphics card, which by the way is still massively outdated, it still had a really, really old CPU architecture, so it's really time for a breath of fresh air, and that's what this new Tegra chip is going to provide. It's going to pretty much do for Nintendo what Intel did for Apple back in the mid-2000s. Now, this last point isn't really too much about architecture, but more about how the system is put together. The Nintendo 64 in the 5th gen was the strongest game console. It had a much faster CPU and a much better GPU than both the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn. Yet, it didn't sell anywhere near as well as the PlayStation, and developers didn't like developing on it, despite the fact that it had the strongest hardware. I know this was a long time ago, but it still is a point to make, that the reason the PlayStation was developed on so much was because it was much easier to develop for compared to the Nintendo 64. Developers didn't have to build their games around the tiny amount of space allocated for Nintendo 64 games on their cartridges. They could pretty much just go balls to the wall and do whatever they wanted to as long as the PlayStation could run the game. If you look at any comparison games between the N64 and the PlayStation, you can see that the N64 is smoother, runs in higher resolutions, and games natively built for the N64, such as Conker's Bad Fur Day or Zelda's Majora's Mask, are much more visually impressive than anything that ever could have been on the PlayStation. Yet, the PlayStation was the dominant console of the time, because it was the easiest one for developers to work with, because Sony worked with these developers to make sure that people knew how to use their system. Just a point that I wanted to bring up, that hardware strength, even though it is important, you do not want an anemic, outdated console. It is not everything when it comes to a console's success. So I hope you learned a little bit from this video, maybe brought up some interesting conversation points. What do you think about the system? Please let me know in the comments, and by the way, follow me on Twitter. I'll say this in every video, but I'm active on Twitter multiple times per day. I don't post videos that much, so if you want to interact with me, just come see me on Twitter. I will respond to you, I will interact with you, and you can always keep up to date on what I'm doing and what I'm thinking about stuff. And if you liked this video, be sure to give me a liking or a thumbing. You all have a great rest of your day.